Hello, and welcome to this special video edition of GSLIScast. Sheila Denn is an assistant professor at Simmons College Graduate School of Library and Information Science. She is currently completing her dissertation through the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, where she's focused on metadata needs for government statistical data, human-computer interaction for complex information seeking, and the relationship of metadata to human-computer interaction. She recently spoke to GSLIScast about her research into the ways students search for and retrieve information on the web, which she presented as part of the GSLIS Research Colloquium on April 17, 2007.
This is my presentation on supporting users in complex information-seeking environments. It's the pilot study from my dissertation work, and I'm just going to talk about a few points having to do with that today. The background for this is that it's my feeling that many information-seeking activities involve gathering and synthesizing information, and that current especially web search kinds of tools don't have the facilities to support the synthesis process. And so the synthesis process, and in essence the information use, is what I'm interested in more than the information seeking itself. So this has to do with information from sources that may be text or statistical tables, graphs, images, other kinds of data. And the idea is that when you are involved in a complex information-seeking task, you are using information from a number of different sources and then gathering it together into an understanding that can help in decision-making or in problem-solving. One of the problems I discovered as I was working on this is the renavigation problem. So in particular, I worked with a project that was looking at government statistical data usage, and people would be able to find sites that would have the information to solve the tasks that we gave them, but they often could not re-find those sites. So they'd find them once and then they wouldn't be able to re-navigate to that information again. So I had that in the back of my mind as something that I was thinking about in terms of a problem that could be solved by having some better support for complex information-seeking tasks. History functions in browsers are underpowered and therefore underutilized. They tend to be very simplistic in the way that they keep track of where you have been previously. And so one of the things that I want to look at is whether history functions can be beefed up to be more useful for this kind of a purpose. And of course, there's no embedded kind of support for any sort of memory aid that is within the browser, although there's a lot of development being done now with Firefox in particular, because the Firefox API and the ability to make extensions to Firefox is really nicely implemented, and so therefore makes building this kind of functionality easier. So in the pilot study, one of the things I wanted to look at is, well, how do users devise their own memory aids when they're trying to do this kind of a task? So I chose a domain. In this case, the domain was career services, so it was job seeking and trying to evaluate a couple of different metropolitan areas to see whether those areas were appropriate for a search within a particular major. And the reason for choosing that domain is two or threefold. First of all, it is a domain that's of interest to my participant population, which was going to be students at UNC Chapel Hill. Second, it is the kind of domain where some different kinds of information are going to be useful. So statistical information from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, for example, can be useful in determining whether the job market for a particular field in a particular area is going to be good for, some amount of time. Finally, I wanted to make sure that the task I was using had, at the end of it, some sort of a decision or a recommendation that the participant would be making, in this case to a fictional third-party client who is trying to decide where to focus his or her job search. The reason for this is that, as I said before, I'm much more interested in the eventual use of information than I am in the seeking per se, and I'm interested in what happens when you have to gather information from a lot of different kinds of resources and then bring them together into a decision that you can then transmit to someone else. So my participants, I had 22, 16 of them were women and 6 men. Mostly I had seniors and graduate students, although I did have a couple of sophomores and juniors. And they came from a very, very wide range of majors. I in fact had more majors than participants because of double majors. The largest single group came from journalism, but I believe that represents only 4 of the final population. So it was a very wide-ranging bunch. So the task is basically to imagine that you're a career consultant. So you're helping someone else with their job search. And what you want to do is you want to express to that person what metropolitan area out of 2 that you choose is going to be most appropriate for a job search within a particular major. And I allowed students to choose the major based on the top 10 majors in the U.S., according to a Princeton University report, and also the top choose 2 from the top 10 metropolitan areas in terms of population as reported by the U.S. Bureau of the Census. That allowed them to make some choices based on their area of interest and their area of knowledge in terms of the majors and perhaps in terms of the cities, but it also meant that it was a constrained set from my participants to work from, and so that's why I chose to do it in that way. Obviously, I'm not going to go into detail about these particular tasks. You can read them on the screen, but in essence, there were 4 tasks. The first, I wanted to know what they thought their strategy was going to be going in. So I asked them for a brief paragraph talking about what their approach was going to be, how they were going to start out this search. Then the next 2 tasks really focus on gathering the information, and I asked them to look at 2 different areas. The first is financial aspects, so things like starting salaries, how much does housing cost, how much does transportation cost, all of those kinds of things. And then the second area, which was a little more vague, was lifestyle issues. So what kinds of recreational opportunities are there? How long is the average commute? What's the climate like? And those were a little more up to the individual participant, but I did emphasize for both of those tasks that what I was looking for was facts, that I didn't want someone's opinion on a blog that said that Milwaukee is a horrible place. I wanted something about, well, Milwaukee has an average temperature, yearly temperature of 52 degrees or whatever it happens to be. So I did emphasize to them that they were looking for facts to base these decisions on and not marketing materials or opinions. The final task was for them to synthesize what they had found into a recommendation that they would give to their putative client that said why it was they were recommending one city versus another, what were the factors that went into that decision. And so I'm at the point now where I'm still analyzing that final piece to see whether there are differences in that synthesis based on the kind of memory aids that people used for themselves. And that analysis is still ongoing right now. So some preliminary results. The primary ways that people constructed memory aids for themselves was scribbling notes on paper, using Word or a text editor to either cut and paste bits of text they found on web pages, or in some cases to write text. And finally creating a bookmark folder and saving bookmarks to it. That was probably the least used of the 3. Scribbling notes and using Word or a text editor were about half and half. Now, what I didn't expect to find was that there were 2 distinct strategies being used, and people didn't mention this in their initial strategy thoughts that I asked them to produce. But there were really 2 major types of people. There were the people who wanted to gather everything first and then synthesize a recommendation. And then there were the people who, as they saw each subsequent piece of information, were synthesizing as they went along. And how those 2 groups used memory aids tended to differ. So the people who gathered everything and then synthesized were the ones who were more likely to use bookmarks and more likely to do cutting and pasting into a text file without adding any notes of their own. Meanwhile, the people who, as they read each new piece of information, were synthesizing as they went along, tended to start out writing their synthesis even before they had searched. They basically wrote the first couple of sentences first, and then they went out, and as they found information, they would just insert it and cut and paste into that paragraph. So they used less of the cutting and pasting, except where it went right into the prose that they themselves were writing. And so I thought that was really interesting, because it does suggest that those different strategies might suggest different tools in order to support people as they're trying to do these activities. Okay, so let's say I have decided that the cities I'm interested in are Boston and New York City, and I'm interested in terms of looking at education. So I'm looking for teaching jobs for someone in either Boston or New York City. One of the places that people would often come to look for that sort of information was the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And so they would come here. They would look for national wage data having to do with different kinds of industries and different kinds of jobs. So if someone was looking for teaching jobs and they wanted to compare, say, Boston and New York City, this page here is from Massachusetts and Boston, looking at the major group of occupations in education, training, and libraries. So let's say I'm looking at I don't want post-secondary. Let's say I'm looking at secondary school teachers, and I want to get some wage information about those. So here we've got national estimates, and we've got for, I guess that's the industry profile. We have the state profile, and then we have the metropolitan area profile. If one of the other cities we were interested in looking at was the New York metropolitan area, then I have here the actual mean wage, and this is the kind of thing that people would often cut and paste. What people would do is they'd open themselves up a Word document, they would paste that number in, and then if it was in a table, so notice that this is in a table, and tables do not do well with cutting and pasting. Usually what they would do is just then write themselves a note that this is, and what is it? And there was a lot of this flipping back and forth to go, okay, annual mean wage, New York metropolitan area, education, or secondary school teachers. And so then they would write themselves a note. Something of that sort. The bookmarkers would generally find a page like this, and then they would make themselves a new bookmark folder. I would have them make a bookmark folder with their subject number. So if I were subject 01, I would make this bookmark folder, and then every time I wanted to add something to it, I could go in and specify that I was going to put it in this bookmark folder. And I did keep all of those folders of bookmarks from subjects after they got through. What was the other kind of... Oh, well, scribbling notes. You can probably imagine what I look like scribbling notes. So that I'm not actually going to do. Now, in terms of further analysis, I'm still looking at this relationship between the strategy and the use of memory aids. I'm also looking at the relationship between the strategy and the quality of the synthesis. Now, the quality issue is a difficult one because it is by necessity somewhat subjective. I do have a rubric I'm using for evaluating the final decisions, written decisions that people gave me, and I am in the process of applying that rubric now, and then I need to get some well, I need to get another rater and then do some inter-rater reliability testing on that. But I'm expecting to find there to be a relationship. Honestly, at this point, I don't know what that relationship is going to be. But I think that it'll be suggestive of where I want to go in terms of what I do about this. What I want to do about this is to build these sorts of memory supports in. And so that's why I'm very excited about Firefox and the Firefox API, because I think that gives me a chance to build some modules onto the browser that might make for a hopefully more seamless information seeking and synthesis experience for users in the future. So eventually what I want to do is actually design a prototype browser interface using the Firefox API. And the cognitive model I'm using for that right now is to talk about it in terms of a scratch pad. So that would be a space where the user could cut and paste, but not just text. One of the issues I found in a pre-existing module I tried to use is that it's great if you're just going to cut and paste a sentence. If you want to cut and paste part of a statistical table, it really falls down. And I think that's a major issue. For people to be able to synthesize different kinds of data seamlessly, they need to be able to handle them seamlessly within any of these kinds of support modules. And so that's a direction I really want to go in, is figuring out how to make it possible to have cut and paste be equal for all of these different kinds of things. I think annotation is also very important for this this kind of work, particularly, and though I didn't look at it in this research, this is a direction I want to go in the future. My belief is that complex information seeking tasks are not necessarily one-session tasks, and so eventually I would like to see something where an information seeking and use environment would be persistent across all of the sessions that go into one information seeking and use activity, so that you could make annotations that you could come back to later on that could help you as you're trying to do the final synthesis. And I could see this being really helpful, particularly in the academic environment where as a student or as a faculty person, you often have a lot of searches that are kind of ongoing over really large periods of time, where it would be very nice to have a way to kind of pick back up and say, oh, this is where I was 2 months ago before things got crazy. And that's it. I would be happy to speak with anyone who wants to talk about these things, and I will have a fuller report hopefully in fall 2007 after I finish my dissertation. Thank you.
You've been listening to GSLIScast, the podcasting service of the Graduate School of Library and Information Science at Simmons College in Boston, Massachusetts. To learn more about the podcast, visit our podcast site at gslis.simmons.edu/podcasts. For more information about Simmons College, visit www.simmons.edu. Thanks for listening.